Hi, I'm Jeffrey, and this is AutoAlchemy, the intersection between typology and self-growth. And the question we're looking at today is, do you have a little goddess within you? I suspect you might, and Ariana agrees with me. So who are you to argue? Anyway, guys, welcome back to the channel. This video is going to be an overview/review of the book Goddesses and Everywoman by Jean Shinoda Bolen. Bolen is a Jungian analyst, a psychiatrist, and an author, and this book was released in the wake of the women's liberation movement of the 60s and 70s. The book emerged out of the energy of that movement, merging certain concerns of the zeitgeist with aspects of Jungian psychology, which I personally appreciate a lot because I know that a lot of thinkers who came from that era wanted to reject Jung entirely. They wanted to disregard him as a relic of the patriarchal past. But obviously, it's always a little more complicated than that. Instead, Goddesses and Everywoman expands upon the Jungian framework, identifying 7 different archetypal forces that can be activated in a woman's psyche and mapping those forces onto the Olympian goddesses. By the way, just so you know, these ideas aren't just for women. Everybody can find at least one of these archetypes activated in their own psyche. And bare minimum, you can actually use this book to learn more about which archetypes you're attracted to. What sort of relational dynamics do you tend to find yourself entangled in? That could be helpful, I'm just saying. Additionally, if you want to buy this book, if you want to read this book, you can check out the affiliate link down below at no extra cost to you. That will help to support my channel and you'll get to read a great book. So anyway, let's dive into it. First question on the table is, what the F is an archetype? So this is my personal definition of archetype, but I tend to think that the author of this book would agree with it. So I think of archetypes as being ancient modes of being. They're permanent patterns within the landscape of the human psyche. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, if we fast forward 200 years into humanity's future, assuming that humanity is still around at that point, we would still see the same archetypal manifestations, although perhaps in different guises. For example, maybe we are doomed and destined for some dystopian future where the archetype of the mother is played by some AI assistant permanently embedded into our brains. Doesn't that sound exciting? Doesn't that sound like a path we want to walk down, Jeff Bezos? You might want to reconsider your choices, Jeff Bezos. In any case, archetypes essentially change clothing across the centuries and across cultures. So for Christians, the archetype of the self might look something like this, while for our Buddhist brethren out there, maybe the self looks a little more like this. Regardless of the particular clothing, we can actually infer things about the shape of the body beneath the clothing, the body of the archetype itself. The binocular view. In this book, Bolen encourages people to take a binocular view of themselves, meaning to truly see ourselves clearly, we have to look at ourselves from 2 different vantage points simultaneously. On one hand, we have to learn to see ourselves in terms of the external cultural pressures that we face, as well as the archetypal and instinctual pressures that are brimming inside of us. So you have the external and the internal, and we as egos are caught in the middle. Those 2 perspectives converge to form this 3-dimensional holographic picture of who we actually are. Now, according to Bolen, and this is something that seems reasonable from my standpoint, I think I agree with this, human beings experience a sense of meaning when what we do is in alignment with our particular inner archetypes. At the same time, this book isn't celebrating the complete surrender to our innate archetypal instinctual forces. I like using adjectives. Sorry about that, guys. I'm an English major, I gotta do something with my degree. But yeah, we're not supposed to completely surrender to these internal drives because each one of them has a shadow side. So instead, the book urges you, the reader, to become conscious of both the external and internal pressures so that you can make wiser choices as the protagonist of your own life. For example, if you suddenly feel an instinctual push to disappear into a new relationship days before you're supposed to take the bar exam, maybe don't do that. Or at least slow down and really think about how this particular relationship fits into your life holistically. Just think about it. Let's start off with the so-called virgin goddesses: Artemis, Hestia, and Athena. In this case, the term virgin is used a little more metaphorically. In mythology, all three of these goddesses were not particularly relational beings. They lived out these self-sufficient, independent existences. Artemis was known as the goddess of the hunt and of the moon. As an archer, her aim was fierce and impeccable. If this archetype is active within you, you're likely logically minded and laser focused on your goals, perhaps seeking those goals in solitude instead of within society. If that doesn't sound like you and you want to cultivate a little more Artemis in your life, savor being single, provided that you actually are single. And if you're not single, spend some time away from your partner, spend some time in the wilderness or playing competitive sports. You want to become a real Katniss of a human being. Unlike Artemis, who separated herself from the world of men, Athena actually identified with men. She fought alongside them on the battlefield, and she was known to be a protector of the heroes, the goddess of wisdom and of crafts. One notable thing about her is that she was always depicted wearing her armor, which in some ways reflected her knack for moderation and also her complete lack of vulnerability. She was always in this encased shell. Interestingly enough, Athena was never truly a child. She emerged fully formed as an adult out of the head of her father Zeus, and maybe some of you out there will relate to that on a weird metaphorical level. Some people are deprived of a childhood. They enter the world and they know that they have to get busy with the business of practical living. If you feel a need to cultivate a little more Athena in your life, practice separating yourself from your emotions, learn to plan, learn to strategize, and consider losing yourself in some academic pursuits. Maybe go to Coursera, find something interesting, and really take that intellectual approach to life. The final virgin goddess is Hestia. So unlike the other goddesses in this particular category, Hestia had more of an introverted focus. She wasn't looking outward towards goals, to the battlefield. Hestia was known as the goddess of the hearth. She was the sacred fire that gently burned in the heart of the temple or of the ancient Greek household. Interestingly enough, back in those days, she was very rarely depicted in human form. She was often depicted as that sacred fire. There was a degree of anonymity associated with her. She wasn't part of the human world. She didn't have a persona in that sense. And that can actually be a drawback for women who identify with this archetype. They don't feel like they're fully participating in the world. They do live a more anonymous existence. But on the other hand, those same women can have a rich, deep inner world and a sense of spirituality that others might envy. So if you want to cultivate more Hestia energy in your life, you should seek out activities that are utterly absorbing, things you can lose yourself within. Meditation might be a good place to start. You could also start taking your time more with the tasks of your life. You could treat everything as if it were part of a Japanese tea ceremony where you're doing everything deliberately, everything carefully and ritualistically. You can do all that, you can explore your spiritual side. These are some ways to access the archetype of Hestia. As I said before, each of these archetypes has a shadow side. You can be too logical, you can be too armored, too anonymous. So if any of that sounds like you, maybe you can remedy the problem by calling on the aid of one of the vulnerable goddesses. This category contains the goddesses Hera, Demeter, and Persephone. And the vulnerable goddesses are defined by their more traditional roles. They are beings that were relational and receptive, and by relating to other people, we often leave ourselves open to being wounded by them or being violated by them. So this is why these goddesses are vulnerable Hera was the goddess of marriage and commitment. She was the wife of Zeus. So much of the narrative of her life revolved around that particular relationship of being a wife. And somebody who is well acquainted with this particular archetype may get a lot out of being a wife or being a partner. Maybe one of the extremes of this archetype is that you might have godlike expectations of an all-too-human partner. In mythology, Zeus was known for being a bit of a dick and also a bit promiscuous, and that promiscuity led to a lot of bitterness on Hera's part. So one of the shadow elements of this archetype is maybe being a little bitter, a little resentful of other women who might be in the orbit of your partner. In any case, if you want to cultivate the positive aspects of Hera in your life, allow yourself to really come into relationship with another person. Learn to prioritize their needs and cherish that spark of divinity within them. So, on to Demeter. Demeter was the goddess of grain and of the harvest. And her most notable relationship, the relationship that made her vulnerable, was the relationship between her and her daughter Persephone, who we'll talk a little bit more about later. Demeter's maternal energy is one that can often go underdeveloped in this day and age, despite the fact that it is as valid an instinct as any other. To incorporate a little of Demeter's energy into your life, imagine what it would be like to have and love a child. Maybe volunteer with kids. If that's a little too much, consider getting a pet. Nurturing something smaller than you can flood you with all sorts of chemical fuzzies. Believe me, I would know. Persephone is the last of the vulnerable goddesses. One day, Persephone was picking flowers in a meadow when Hades, god of the underworld, erupted from the earth and carried her off into the abyss. Though she was eventually rescued thanks to the efforts of her mother, she had consumed pomegranate seeds from the underworld, and that particular act bound her to that realm for a third of the year. If you have a lot of Persephone energy in your life, you may be something of an eternal maiden, an eternal child, somebody who doesn't want to grow up, somebody who is perhaps a little overly dependent upon the nurturance of another. More positively, maybe like Persephone, you have become a true queen of the underworld, intimate with all things archetypal, all things unconscious and dreamlike. If you want to cultivate Persephone, learn the power of surrender. Allow yourself to truly need and rely upon another person. Or maybe acquaint yourself with the underworld by keeping a dream journal and creating a bridge to your own unconscious mind. That's a powerful skill. I wouldn't mind cultivating it. Shit. And now we come to the alchemical goddess. There's only one goddess in this particular category, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, and creativity. Aphrodite exists in an in-between space. She's a goddess that did in fact have relationships, yet throughout all of her relationships, she was able to retain and maintain her autonomy. She had the focus of the virgin goddesses, but she remained receptive like the vulnerable goddesses. If you identify with the archetype of Aphrodite, you might seek out a lot of variety, intensity, change, creativity. To cultivate more Aphrodite in your life, learn the art of savoring. Lose yourself in sensate pleasure. Allow yourself to finally disappear into a moment. Maybe give yourself permission to take a vacation. Go get a massage. Go give a massage. Do a bunch of other things that might be a little too steamy for YouTube. Who is in charge anyway? Those are the goddesses, and I'm sure that at least one or two of them stood out to you and resonated with you on some instinctual level. Maybe you even learned about a couple of others that you want to integrate in some capacity into your life, and if so, that's great. By all means, play around with embodying these different energies and then bask in your heightened, elevated consciousness. The ultimate goal is to view these archetypal forces as a sort of committee within the psyche. with your ego being the head of that committee. As the protagonist of your own life, your task is to navigate these internal forces in the same way that you do external culture, so that you can make better, more informed choices, so that you can be not the plaything of the gods and goddesses, but fully human. That about wraps it up. If you want early access to content like this and other bonus goodies, consider becoming a member at my support page. Until next time.